I had heard the rumors long before I set foot inside St. Augustine Hospital. Everyone who worked here knew about the forbidden wing, the place no one entered, the place where time itself seemed to have stopped. I never believed in ghost stories, but the way the nurses spoke in hushed tones, the way the security guards avoided even looking toward that corridor, made me uneasy. On my first night shift, I couldn't help but let my curiosity get the best of me. The hospital was quieter than I had ever experienced. The steady beep of heart monitors, the occasional shuffle of footsteps in the hall, everything felt normal. Yet, something about the far end of the east wing, where the hallway abruptly turned into darkness, made my skin crawl. I had walked by that passage several times already, but tonight I stopped and stared. The old wooden double doors at the end were chained shut, a rusted padlock securing them. A sign, faded and peeling, read, "Restricted area, do not enter." "That place gives me the creeps," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Nurse Evelyn, an older woman who had been working here for over 20 years. She adjusted her glasses and shook her head. "You should stay away from it." "Why is it closed off?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Evelyn hesitated, as if debating whether to tell me. "It used to be the psychiatric ward. Decades ago. Something happened, but nobody talks about it. Just know that people who go near that place—" She paused, lowering her voice. "Sometimes hear things. See things." I wanted to laugh it off, but something in her expression unsettled me. "What kind of things?" She sighed, looking around, as if making sure no one else was listening. "Crying, whispers, shadows moving where there shouldn't be any. The janitor swears he saw a woman standing inside, staring at him through the cracks in the door." She leaned in closer. "And the worst part? The hospital records show that no patients were transferred when the ward was shut down, but no one ever found any bodies either." A chill ran down my spine. "Do yourself a favor and don't ask too many questions," she added before walking away. Left alone in the dimly lit hallway, I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned back to the door. Maybe it was the flickering fluorescent light overhead, but for a split second, I thought I saw movement between the narrow gap where the doors met. A shadow shifting. Watching. I took a step back. My rational mind told me it was nothing. Just my imagination playing tricks on me after hearing Evelyn's story. But deep inside, something told me that the rumors weren't just rumors, and I was about to find out the truth. I don't know what came over me that night, but the moment I found myself standing in front of the chained doors again, my fear felt smaller than my curiosity. The hallway was empty, the hospital silent except for the occasional hum of distant machines. I reached out, running my fingers over the cold, rusted chains. A layer of dust coated the surface, as if no one had touched them in years. But something wasn't right. The links rattled slightly, like they had just been disturbed. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. A strange sensation prickled the back of my neck. The overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I held my breath and leaned in closer. The gap between the doors was barely an inch wide, but in the dim glow of the emergency exit light, I thought I saw movement inside. Slow, subtle. A flicker of something shifting in the darkness. My pulse quickened. I knew I should walk away, but instead I reached for my phone, switching on the flashlight and angling it toward the crack. The beam of light sliced through the dust-filled air inside. Rows of old hospital beds lined the walls, their sheets crumpled, rusted ivy stands still standing beside them. A wheelchair sat in the middle of the room, its wheels caked with grime. The air smelled stale, like old paper, and something rotten beneath it. Then I saw it. A handprint, smudged against the inside of the glass panel on the door. It wasn't old, it wasn't faded, it was fresh. I stumbled back, my breath hitching. That was impossible. No one had been in there for decades. At least that's what everyone said. The logical part of me screamed that it was just a trick of the light, but my gut knew better. The hospital was old, sure, but there was something wrong with this place. I don't remember making the decision to move, but before I knew it, I was searching for a way in. The padlock was rusted, but it held firm. My fingers trembled as I traced the chains, following them down to where they hooked into the door handles. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a gap between the doors, just enough for a person to squeeze through if they tried hard enough. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the need to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that something inside was calling to me. Either way, I found myself sliding into the darkness, pressing my back against the cold metal doors as I pulled my legs through the narrow opening. The moment my feet hit the ground inside, the air changed. The silence was thick, heavy, the kind that pressed against your ears like the moment before a storm. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, I thought I heard something. Soft breathing, just beyond the reach of my light. I swallowed hard and took a step forward. The floor was covered in dust, but as I swept my flashlight across the ground, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints, leading deeper into the ward. I followed them, each step feeling like I was walking further away from safety. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with patient rooms, their doors slightly ajar, as if left in a hurry. I stopped at the first one and hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, the room was frozen in time. A hospital bed, sheets still crumpled. An old IV bag hanging from a stand, its fluid long evaporated. But what made my skin crawl was the chair beside the bed. It was facing the wall, and something told me it wasn't empty. I stepped closer. The chair creaked, a raspy breath filled the silence. I ran. My footsteps pounded against the dust-covered floor as I bolted down the hallway, my flashlight beam shaking wildly. I didn't dare look back. Whatever I had heard, whatever had breathed behind me, was real. I reached a junction where the corridor split into two paths. My breathing was ragged, my heartbeat thunderous in my ears. The way I had come from suddenly felt suffocating, like something was pressing in from behind, urging me forward. The only choice was deeper inside. I turned left. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the scent of mildew and something else. Something metallic. My flashlight flickered again. That's when I saw them. Doors. Dozens of them lining the hallway, each labeled with names and numbers, their windows smeared with grime. Some were slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of the rooms beyond. Crumpled bed sheets, overturned chairs, abandoned medical carts. The whispers I had dismissed earlier were growing clearer now. Not in my ears, but in my head. I pressed forward, drawn toward the door, at the very end of the hallway. Unlike the others, this one was different. The nameplate had been removed, leaving behind only rusted screws and a dark stain on the metal surface. My gut screamed at me to turn back, but my hands were already moving, pushing the door open. The room was larger than the others, almost like a ward meant for multiple patients. Rows of empty beds lined the walls, their metal frames gleaming under the dim glow of my flashlight. But what made me stop cold was the massive cabinet in the corner, its glass doors covered in handprints. Some were small, others not human. I swallowed hard and stepped closer. The whispering in my head grew louder, like voices layered over one another, overlapping in agony. I reached for the cabinet handle, my fingers trembling. The glass was ice cold. I pulled. The door groaned open, revealing stacks of old patient files, yellowed with age. The papers were brittle, but as I flipped through them, the names started to blur together, a pattern forming. These weren't just any patients. They were all admitted on the same date, and every single file ended with the same word, stamped in red ink. Missing. My hand shook as I shuffled through the records, my breathing shallow. Pages were missing, no discharge papers, no death certificates, just empty endings. It didn't make sense. Then I saw the last file. Unlike the others, this one had a photograph attached to it. I hesitated before pulling it closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The picture was old, black and white, showing a group of patients sitting in a common area. Their faces were hollow, their eyes sunken and distant. But my blood turned to ice when I looked closer. In the background, near the farthest bed, someone was staring directly at the camera. A woman. Her face was blurred, unnatural. Her eyes, too dark, too hollow. Unlike the others, she wasn't sitting. She wasn't part of the group. She was standing in the shadows, watching me. A sharp, deafening bang made me drop the file. The cabinet doors had slammed shut on their own. The whispers turned into a deafening chorus. An unbearable wail of agony that filled the room. The walls felt like they were closing in. My flashlight flickered violently, and in that brief moment of darkness, I felt it. A presence. Cold breath against my neck. Fingers brushing against my shoulder. I turned, and the last thing I saw before the light died completely was a pair of hollow black eyes staring into mine. Darkness swallowed me whole. My flashlight had died completely, leaving me standing in the suffocating pitch black of the abandoned ward. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse hammering so violently that I could hear it in my ears. I knew I wasn't alone. The presence was behind me. Close, too close. I took a shaky step backward, my fingers groping along the edge of the cabinet for support. A whisper, low, distorted, crawling under my skin, brushed against my ear. Stay. A cold, invisible grip wrapped around my wrist. I gasped and jerked my arm away, stumbling back into one of the rusted hospital beds. The metal screeched against the floor. The whispering around me turned into agonized wails, a chorus of voices trapped in endless torment. I had to get out. Ignoring the burn of terror in my throat, I turned and bolted toward the door. But as I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut on its own. The impact shook the walls. I yanked at the knob, my sweaty fingers slipping, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. A sudden cold pressure wrapped around my ankle. I looked down. Assohanda Bush was emerging from beneath the hospital bed, pale and skeletal, its fingers digging into my skin. I let out a choked scream and kicked wildly, my foot connected with something solid. A sickening crunch, and the grip loosened just enough for me to stumble back. I didn't waste a second. I turned, scanning the room in a blind panic, searching for another way out. The only other exit was a small window near the ceiling, covered in grime, and half shattered from years of neglect. It was too high to reach, but there was a metal cabinet beneath it. If I could climb on top, the lights flickered, just for a second, and in that second I saw them. Figures, dozens of them. Gaunt, hollow-eyed patients in tattered hospital gowns, standing between me and my only escape. Their faces were sunken, their mouths moving silently, as if them screaming. But no sound came out. Then they started moving, not walking, gliding. Straight toward me, panic surged through my veins like wildfire. I now lunged to hunt for the cabinet. Scrambling onto its surface, the metal groaned under my weight. Behind me, the whispers turned into frenzied shrieks. Fingers clawed at my ankles, cold and relentless, trying to pull me down. I didn't think. I threw myself at the window. Glass shattered around me as I crashed through. Pain exploded across my arms as shards sliced into my skin, but I barely felt it. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then I heard them, the whispers. They weren't inside the hospital anymore. They were right behind me.